Some disclaimers before we begin. 1. There may be some background noise. And 2. This is being recorded live, so expect some mistakes. Chapter 2. This wasn't a good start for the new Nothing Dangerous regime. Itch's arsenic was contained in a recently acquired piece of green leaf patterned wallpaper. The guy who sold it to him had explained that in the 19th century arsenic had been used as a dye. It had been called Paris green and was considered the best green pigment it was possible to buy. After breakfast, Itch went back to his room to get his school rucksack. Somehow it had survived the explosion of the night before. He blew some ash from the strap and dusted off the rest. When he returned from school, he would begin the transfer of his collection, his kit, and his books to the shed. But in the meantime, he had to decide what to do with his more dangerous items. Personally, Itch didn't think they were dangerous at all, as long as he didn't try to eat them or set fire to them, but he knew his mum would not agree. Under the new closer inspection regime, these items might not survive. He had always kept the riskiest elements of his collection out of sight. In his bedroom ceiling was a small recessed square of wood, which, when pushed up, gave access to the loft and the water tanks. One of the first things he had done after they moved into the house was to write Itch's Loft in biro on his white paint. It had made his father laugh, and he was still part of the joke. Standing on a chair, he eased the plywood cover back into the darkness. His eyes quickly found the packages he was looking for, and he eased them out. They were dusty, damp, and, Itch thought, smelled of garlic. One was a large A3 envelope, which he folded in half. One was a jiffy bag, and the other was a small, tightly wound plastic bag with a rubber band around it. He placed them all at the bottom of his rucksack, his schoolbooks going on top. For the moment, they'd be safer with him. Itch was now walking the mile to school with Chloe, an envelope stuck with the arsenic wallpaper, a matchbox with a teaspoon of gunpowder in it, and 2 radioactive claw cans in a jiffy bag. These cans had apparently been painted with radium in order to make them luminous. Itch had bought them from a mineral seller he had first met at a Surfers Against Sewage fairness in Austell that Jack had taken him to. The mineral seller had said his name was Cake. Just Cake, no first name. Or was that his first name? Itch wasn't sure. He had wanted the gunpowder because it had sulphur in it, and he hadn't collected any of that yet. A gunpowder sounded cool. The claw cans looked dull, but the fact that they were painted with radium made them his first radioactive acquisition. The arsenic wallpaper was, apparently, rare, and Itch had been told that he should buy some while he could. The whole lot had cost him £60 in total, which was all his savings. As they walked down the hill towards the golf course in the sea, Chloe said, "You know the people will notice your face." "Your friends might, but the kids in my class won't," said Itch. "Boys don't look at eyebrows very much." "But your face looks all weird now. Of course they'll notice," Chloe replied. "Any fool would notice." "Not the fools in my class, Chloe, trust me. Unless Potts, Paul, and Campbell spot it, of course. In which case I won't hear the end of it." James Potts, Bruno Paul, and Darcy Campbell were the main Itch baiters in the school. They thought that Itch's dislike of sport was proof of his weirdness. Of course, they were the sportiest pupils in the school and liked everyone to know it. It seemed to infuriate them that Itch had no desire to be like them, and for that reason alone they had decided to make his life difficult. Chloe was included in this just for being his sister, and even their cousin Jack, who was in Itch's class, got some stick. It had been Darcy who had first used the itchy and scratchy line that was now common usage across the school. Even Mrs. Tooley in Year 7 English had been heard to use it. Other nicknames had come and gone. Snitch and Lofty had lasted longest. Eventually they petered out. Most of the pupils just ignored Itch, so they had no reason to call him anything at all. The golf course sat in the middle of the town, with most of the houses further up the hill to the north. If they were early enough, Itch and Chloe could get across the course without being shouted at. Walking around it added another 15 minutes, and they were cutting it fine as it was. The almost new Cornwall Academy lay at the southern end of the town, beyond the shops. It had previously been called Pitt Cowan Secondary, which was generally declared to be rubbish, and had now been turned into a swanky academy. Clearly a lot of money had been spent. All the buildings were new and full of top-of-the-range equipment. Only the main hall of the old school had been deemed good enough to survive the upgrade. The school had been designated a science academy and attracted many sponsors, charities, eminent scientists, and a global oil company. The academy logo proclaimed, "Together, inspired." No one seemed quite sure what it meant. Chloe and Itch turned off the golf course and headed down the high street. Most of the shops were still shut, with only the newsagents and 2 cafes open. Many of the tourist shops hadn't bothered opening since last October, but with summer only a few weeks away, they were showing signs of life, with coats of paint and new surfing gear displays. What was that bang last night, anyway? Asked Chloe. I thought you had blown yourself up. Only a little phosphorus. Well, a little too much phosphorus, actually, said Itch, rubbing the place where his eyebrows had been. Chloe looked up at her brother. Like all Losts, she was tall for her age, but she was still 9 inches shorter than Itch. She had short, pixie-like brown hair, but the same blue-green eyes as him. You could borrow some mascara. She started rummaging in her bag, but Itch stopped her. That's the most stupid thing you've ever said. I might get away with no eyebrows, but painted ones? Are you mad? And since when did you wear mascara? Chloe shrugged and stopped looking. You're gonna have to stop drawing attention to yourself at home, you know, she said. Itch sighed. I know. I need to only do the quiet stuff for a while. At least I'm in the shed now. Mum will forget I even exist. Chloe laughed. He had a point. Their mum's work as a solicitor kept her out of the house till late most nights, and if Itch spent the weekend in the shed, he would, to all intents and purposes, disappear completely from her life. Chloe ran off as they entered the school reception area, and Itch made his way down the corridor. It was the week before the May half-term, and much of the academy seemed to be in a frenzy of exam preparation. There were timetables everywhere, with last-minute revision sessions advertised on every notice board. None of this affected Itch yet, of course. He was a year away from his first GCSEs. But he sensed the tension that kicks in with the dreaded exam season. He peered into Chloe's classroom as he went past and saw that she was chatting happily to a group of friends. Chloe found the friends thing a whole lot easier than Itch did, but he was pleased she had settled in at the academy in her first year. He walked on past the other form rooms, turned the corner by the science block with its familiar aromas of gas, floor cleaner, and the unquantifiable smell of 1,000 different experiments. He turned left again and came to his form room. He paused, closed his eyes, and took a deep breath. He always had a shot of nerves before he walked into the classroom, but today was worse. He opened his eyes, pulled some hair forward to where his eyebrows had been, and went in. Hey, Itch, come and have a look at this. He relaxed. It was his cousin Jack, the best thing that had happened to him in all his time at the academy. Jack was short for Jacqueline, and she was tall, like all the Losts, with short, straight, jet black hair cut with a fringe. She had lived in Cornwall all her life as her parents ran a couple of guest houses. She sat with Itch when classes allowed. They had barely known each other till Itch's family had moved down from London, but now she was his constant companion. Itch had loved the fact that Jack seemed to accept him as he was and didn't expect or want him to change. For her part, Jack had always wanted a brother or sister and couldn't believe her luck when the slightly odd cousin she had heard about but barely met turned out to be a whole lot more interesting than most of her school friends. She was happy to have an almost brother round the corner. Her father, John, and mother, Zoe, had helped them all move into their new house and then shown Itch, Chloe, and their elder brother, Gabriel, around the town. With Jack in the same class, Itch could stop trying to make friends. In his first week at the academy, he had really made an effort. He'd laughed at everyone's jokes, joined the science club, and hung around after school. But the only person who was ever pleased to see him was Jack. She realized that Itch was a little different, but she was happy to tolerate that. When Itch started to tell her about the chemical composition of her Twix or why her apple was turning brown, she would just flick his ear or poke him with a pencil. Don't be boring, Itch, or I'll tell you about Hollyoaks. This mention of Jack's favourite TV show was usually enough to stop him in his tracks. Itch went over to Jack's desk and was about to throw his bag down when he remembered what was in it and placed it rather more carefully on a chair. Jack waved a magazine at him. It was a surfing publication called Up. Latest one, she told him. It's got the new suits in. Check out the O'Neill Psycho Freak. It says it's the warmest and most flexible wetsuit ever. Itch looked at the windswept and tanned male model who was showing off the Psycho Freak. Looks great, but the price doesn't. At £290, it was so out of his price range, Itch didn't really want to read about how brilliant it was. Surfing was more Jack and Chloe's thing anyway. I'll make do with Gabriel's old one for another year, I suppose. No one's expecting me to be the best-dressed guy on the beach, are they? His brother's wetsuit had been his for 2 years now. It had once been ridiculously big, but was now eye-wateringly tight. He'd like a new one, of course, but all his money was going on element hunting. There was also the small matter of not being very good at surfing. Try as he might, and Jack was always attempting to give him lessons, when a wave came, he could be relied upon to miss it. Time for a surf after school, called Jack. Surf's about right at 4. Thanks, Jack, but Mum's told me I've got to move all my rocks and stuff out of my room. Had a little accident last night. Did it by any chance involve a flash big enough for you to lose your eyebrows? She smiled and turned away to speak to some other classmates. So Chloe was right, Itch thought. It was noticeable, but he still reckoned the boys would have no idea. By now, most of the class were in, the last two arrivals being Tom Westgate and James Potts. Tom tolerated it, but James Potts most definitely did not. Shorter than most of the class, he was nevertheless faster and stronger. He wore trainers with everything and boasted that he had an illegal tattoo somewhere really exotic, though no one had ever seen it and many doubted it existed at all. His fellow sports geeks and loft baiters, Darcy Campbell and Bruno Paul, were in the other Year 9 class. 2 or 3 times a day they were in the same classroom with Itch, and unless there was some big sports event to discuss, their attention would normally turn to making Itch's life as difficult as possible. Their form teacher, John Watkins, hurried in, bags, books and files piled precariously in front of him and a briefcase somehow hooked around his fingers. As usual, he looked as though he had dressed in the dark, orange trousers and a green shirt with permanent sweat stains under the arms. The smell of tobacco suggested that he had enjoyed one last hasty fag before entering the fray of another day as form teacher of 9W at the Cornwall Academy. He let everything topple out of his arms and onto his desk, where the bags, books and files formed an unsteady pile. Mr. Watkins glanced at it long enough to make sure it wasn't about to slide off onto the floor, then turned to smile at his class. "Morning, boys. Let's begin." Form 9W had given up, pointing out that the class was more than 50% girls, and just accepted that by boys he meant everyone. Mr. Watkins had come from an all-boys school in Edinburgh 5 years ago, and he was clearly not about to change the way he spoke to a class. He was overweight, permanently sweating, and always bustling everywhere at full speed. He was head of geography and geology at the academy and one of the most popular teachers they had. His stories were legendary, and many a class would begin or end with a thrilling tale of flooding, earthquakes, or riots. "All present. Excellent. A good weekend, I trust." "Splendid. Who wants to get me a tea?" "Sam, be your love. 1 sugar, thanks." Sam Jennings, who usually sat near the front of every class, rose wearily from her seat to perform the ritual that was a normal part of every morning with Mr. Watkins. He always had his own kettle and weird tea bags at the front of the class. "A reminder from our new friend Dr. Flowerdew and our colleagues in the science department that biology today is in the greenhouse. You may take bottles of water with you. Some clowns last year thought they wouldn't need any and fainted on a cactus or something unpleasant. It's hot and steamy in there. You can get some water at lunch." "Ah, Sam, a lovely brew, thank you." Sam Jennings shrugged and sat down again while Mr. Watkins took registration with his usual speed. The first 2 periods for Itch were history and English, which he drifted through without having to concentrate much. More tutors, more Animal Farm. Itch struggled in most subjects and only really engaged with any lessons when it came to science. The biology session in the greenhouse was intriguing. They hadn't had any lessons there before. But first he had double mass and lunch to endure. Lunch would be tough today because Jack was busy with friends and Chloe had a choir rehearsal. Whenever this happened, he ate on his own and then when some of the itch baiters wouldn't find him, usually the library. He met Jack just before biology. His cousin already had 2 bottles of water with her. She handed him one. "Thought you might forget," she said as I started to walk around the outside of the school, between the playing fields and the language labs and then past the old school hall. The greenhouse had been part of the rebuilding when the school became an academy, and it featured prominently on the website. The school was very proud of their greenhouse. "Didn't see you at lunch," Jack continued. "My mates had to go early, roped into sorting out tickets for some school band concert after half-term, so I looked for you." "Reading," said Itch. "With anyone?" "Well, there were other people there, but I wasn't with them, no." Itch and Jack had got as far as the old hall when they heard the familiar cry of "Weirdo Cousins." It came from a trio of voices, Potts, Paul and Campbell. They had set the words to an R&B song that was all over the radio and TV, but singing wasn't their strong point, and it ended up sounding like a rowdy football chant. However, they were clearly enjoying themselves and continued the refrain all the way to the greenhouse. Itch and Jack walked on in silence, Itch with his head bowed and Jack looking away. During his first months at the CA, Itch had answered back, shouted back, and rude gestured back, but when he hooked up with Jack, she suggested ignoring them in the hope that they would get bored and pick on someone else, but it had just seemed to irritate them all the more. However, until a new strategy could be dreamed up, the take-no-notice policy remained in place. As it turned out, Itch and Jack, Potts, Paul and Campbell, and most of the rest of the Year 9 biology class all arrived at the greenhouse at the same time. It was an impressive structure, fully 30 metres long, 10 metres wide and 10 metres tall. The wood was painted white, and from a distance you could see assorted plants filling the interior, though up close the condensation made inspection difficult. A few cracked panes of glass remained from last year's earthquake. The broken ones had been replaced. Small earthquakes were not uncommon in Cornwall, but Mr. Watkins had told him that at 3.8 on the Richter scale it had been bigger than most. They all milled around for a while, waiting for Miss Glenacre, the biology teacher, to emerge. Many of the class pressed their faces against the glass to get a glimpse of what was in store for them, but the steamed-up pains frustrated all but the most keen-eyed students. After a few minutes, the door opened, and Miss Glenacre appeared with Dr. Nathaniel Flowerdew, the head of science, at her shoulder. The sight of the two of them was enough to trigger a few groans around the edges of the student gathering. Miss Glenacre was, by common consent, approaching her 100th birthday, and had never had a charitable thought about anyone in her life. The truth was, she was indeed waiting for retirement, but only from the vantage point of 64 years, and had actually enjoyed teaching until the paperwork and government took over. By contrast, Flowerdew was an impressive figure. In his late 40s, he was rakishly good-looking, with a head full of well-cut, tight curls that had turned completely white. He had deep blue eyes, broad shoulders, and the figure of a man who had gym membership. As there wasn't a gym in the local area, everyone had concluded that he had the relevant equipment at home. He was wearing a dark blue suit, brilliant white cotton shirt, and electric blue silk tie. The jacket was undone, and a brushed chrome watch showed from beneath his left cuff. His shoes were black loafers. Everything was expensive and somehow out of place in a school field outside a greenhouse. As a teacher, however, Flowerdew had proved instantly unpopular. Always seemingly in a sour mood, he gave everyone the impression that the academy was somehow beneath him. It was also clear that the rest of the staff didn't rate him. His reputation, so everyone said, was as a brilliant chemist. The staff and pupils of the CA were waiting for the evidence. He addressed the students, his voice crisp and educated. "Shut up, 9W, and listen. You will have one period of Miss Glenacre here, and when you have come out, you will not have fainted, you will have listened, and you will know what a Neomyrica caerulea is. Don't touch anything you are not asked to touch, don't put anything in your mouth, burn them, and for heaven's sake, drink water when you need it. You don't need to ask permission. Miss Glenacre is pleased to be your guide. Listen well." And with that, he strode back round the old hall in the direction of his labs. Johnny Burnham, who had once put some magnesium ribbon in his mouth to see what it tasted like, flushed scarlet and shrank a little. They all trooped into the steamy confines of the greenhouse. Miss Glenacre marched to the far end and waited, hands on hips, for everyone to catch her up. She called out, "All bags to be left at the door. There isn't room for swinging rucksacks in here." Itch, Jack, and half the class turned round and put their bags in a heap by the entrance. Itch wondered whether it was wise to leave his rucksack unattended, but he didn't have a choice. He left it on top of the pile where he could see it. They trooped back past the bananas, tomatoes, cacti, and other unrecognizable plants to where the glowing Miss Glenacre waited to start the lesson. "Why are we here?" she said. Silence. "Anyone, why are we here?" "An accident of evolution," chanced the very brave Ian Steele, standing near some peculiar dangly pink plants. Itch and a few others smiled. Miss Glenacre scowled. "Idiot boy, Steele. Now, not why we are on Earth, as you well know, but why are we in the greenhouse?" "Because it cost a fortune," tried Bruno Paul, smiling and nudging James Potts next to him. "The point you're making is that we are very lucky to have such a splendid resource. You are quite correct, but that is not the answer. Anyone?" Itch knew the answer but kept his head down. "No one at all," sighed Miss Glenacre. "We are studying," and she said the next word very slowly as if to 5-year-olds, "photosynthesis. Turning carbon dioxide into sugar and oxygen using light." She tutted, and motioning for the group to follow her, turned and started her tour of the plants. They'd only been in the greenhouse for 15 minutes, but the temperature was 35 degrees Celsius. Glenacre's words were punctuated by the sound of water bottles being squished and emptied by the students of Year 9. It was after about 30 minutes, just as Miss Glenacre was trying to pull down the top of a giant spiky green and yellow plant, that the first student vomited. It was Johnny Burnham, and it was spectacular. He had been swaying and staggering for a few moments. Then, with one hand over his mouth and the other pushing his classmates out of the way, he brought up his breakfast all over a plant labelled Eucomus Pola Evansi. He knelt down on the floor, his hands gripping the sides of a large pot, his head deep in the foliage. It was clear he hadn't finished. Then 2 girls fainted. Natalie Hussein and Debbie Price had turned horribly pale and collapsed on top of each other. There were screams from some of the other girls, and before Miss Glenacre had reached the door to allow some fresh air, and 4 more students had been sick. The stink of vomit filled the greenhouse within seconds. "Everyone out!" yelled their teacher. "Tom, go and get Dr. Flowerdew." Tom Westgate ran out of the door. The class stumbled outside as quickly as they could, hands or tissues over their mouths and noses. Glenacre propped up Johnny Burnham and called for Itch and Jack to help Natalie and Debbie. Itch picked up Natalie by the shoulders and got her into a sitting position. She groaned, opened her eyes, and was sick over Itch's trousers. "Nice shot, Nats," called a fleeing Darcy Campbell. "Feeling a bit bad myself, miss," said Itch, looking down at the dampness on his legs. "Same," said Jack, who had been struggling to help Debbie Price to her feet. Itch swiftly lowered Natalie back down and ran for the door. He almost made it, too. He got as far as the pile of bags and was sick there instead. He stumbled outside and slumped down on the grass. He closed his eyes. Everything was spinning. He could tell without looking that a good proportion of Miss Glenacre's biology class were now in the process of being violently ill. When he opened his eyes again, he saw Jack and Miss Glenacre helping a very wobbly Natalie, Debbie, and Johnny out of the greenhouse. Itch tried to stand up, but felt so giddy he sat right back down again. It looked as though his teacher had been sick too. By the time Dr. Flowerdew came running round the old hall, closely followed by Tom Westgate and a short, wiry girl from Year 10, the entire class and their teacher were lying sprawled across the grass. Some were still throwing up, many were groaning with hands clasped around their stomachs, and at least half a dozen were crying quietly. Flowerdew pulled up sharply, unable to comprehend what he was seeing. It was like a scene from a disaster movie. What on earth? What is... He looked around, trying to find Miss Glenacre. "Grace, where are you? Grace?" She raised her hand. She clearly didn't want to open her mouth just yet. Dr. Flowerdew ran across to her, stepping over students and shouting at Tom to go and get the head. Tom Westgate turned and ran off again. "What the hell has happened? Grace, talk to me. I only let you half an hour ago." Flowerdew managed to sound concerned and furious at the same time. Grace Glenacre's long grey hair, which had been tied back, was now loose. A few strands were plastered to the side of her face. She put a hand in front of her mouth and tried to speak. "I don't know." She sounded hoarse. She coughed and spat. Flowerdew looked away and she apologized and tried again. Her voice was stronger this time. "I don't know. Everything was fine. It was hot, of course, but everyone had their water. I think I got as far as the Passiflora when Burnham started being sick." "Burnham," said Flowerdew. "I might have known. Was he eating the plants as well, studying them?" "The boy's a fool. And then hysteria took over, I suppose, and everyone joined in. What a mess this is." Miss Glenacre looked incredulous. "Are you including me in the hysteria? Are you suggesting I just joined in?" She sat up a little. "Well, it's possible, isn't it?" said Flowerdew. "It's very hot in there. You have 27 students in an enclosed space. One of them gets ill and it's easy for others to follow suit. Classic copycat stuff." Grace Glenacre had forgotten that she had just been ill. Now she was furious. "How dare you? How dare you?" she shouted. "I don't think I have ever sworn at a member of staff before, but I'm going to now." She swore at him. "I have no idea what just happened in there, but 27 sick kids and one sick teacher is not hysteria." Her voice was rising now. "It's not hysteria. Do you hear me?" Flowerdew stood up. "You're hysterical," he said. "We'll talk later." He went into the greenhouse, but the heat and the acrid stench ahead him forced him back. In front of him was an extraordinary scene. The plants were arranged in long, evenly spaced rows with a wide aisle down the middle. There were 50 different varieties of flora, some huge, green and nearly hitting the roof, others wide and spectacularly colourful. It seemed to Flowerdew that they were all somewhat more colourful than an hour ago. Everywhere he looked there were regurgitated lunches. He just realised he was standing in a small pool of gastric juices and sausage when he heard the unmistakable sound of the head arriving. Dr. Felicity Dart was running fast. She was in her early 50s, but she kept herself fit and trim, cycling to school and often jogging around the playing fields at lunchtime. In general, staff and pupils liked and respected her, but knew that she had a fierce temper and a voice like a foghorn. If she started a shouting session, everyone knew about it. Just as Dr. Flowerdew had done, she pulled up short as she surveyed her pupils. A couple of them were still retching and many were still flat out, but a few were now sitting up, texting. She looked beyond the Year 9s where Miss Glenacre sat, visibly shaking. Then she turned to the head of science, who was still standing in the doorway of the greenhouse. "Dr. Flowerdew!" she hollered. "If you wouldn't mind." She ran over to Grace Glenacre, who said, "I'll be okay. Check on the children. Some have been very ill." Felicity Dart turned to the still puffing Tom Westgate. "Tom, go and get Mr. Littlewood and tell him to call for ambulances, please." Tom glanced at his classmates and headed off for the third time. Jim Littlewood was the new history teacher and a qualified first aider. Flowerdew came over, closely followed by a staggering, unrecognisable boy, his head down, his mouth covered by his hands. He gave a muffled groan and Florgie turned. The head of science had just enough time to identify Craig Murray before the boy projectile vomited over Florgie's immaculately pressed trousers. Everyone froze for a moment as the contents of Craig's stomach spread slowly towards the teacher's polished shoes. Everyone, that is, except Sam Jennings, who was recording the moment on her phone. "If I see that on YouTube, Sam," called Dr. Dart, "I'll know exactly who to see in my office, won't I?" "Yes, miss," said a grinning Sam. When it did indeed appear on YouTube, she claimed her brothers had taken her phone and uploaded the clip against her wishes. No one believed her. Florgie wiped himself down with his handkerchief and some tissues which Dr. Dart had passed over. He was red-cheeked and obviously uncomfortable as the dampness seeped into his trousers, but he spoke calmly. "Right, well, it's a real mess in there, Felicity. Vomit everywhere. Burnham made a plant, I think, was sick, and then they all started. Everyone is okay now, though." "Really? Are you seriously suggesting with the whole class ill and prostate after a lesson that everyone is okay?" "Now, while we wait for the ambulances, we will need some water. Get as much as you can from the kitchen, please." For the briefest of moments, Dr. Dart thought she detected an "isn't there someone more junior than me" look, but then Florgie said, "Of course," and pulling the clinging fabric of his damp trousers away from his legs, he jogged away. Itch and Jack were sitting together. Both had stopped being ill. The Year 10 girl who had arrived with Florgie and Tom Westgate introduced herself as Lucy Cavendish. She gave them both cups of water. Finishing his, Itch got up slowly and offered a hand to Jack, who shook her head and closed her eyes again. He went over to where the head was talking to some of the students. "Don't know what happened, miss. I just started to feel giddy and I threw up on Matt's head." This was Timothy Abbott, a rotund, normally cheerful boy. He sounded almost proud of his name. "Johnny was sick first, miss, then we all got it," said Ian Steele. "I was starting to feel bad before Johnny was sick, miss." Dr. Dart turned round at that. It was Natalie Hussein. "Before Johnny? You felt ill before?" "How long before?" "About 5 minutes, miss. Debbie was looking awful, so we leaned on each other for a bit, and that's all I remember. Next thing I was out of here." Felicity Dart found Debbie Price, who was now propping herself up on her elbows. Jim Littlewood, Dr. Florgie, and some of the catering staff bearing jugs of water were arriving now, along with assorted sixth formers who had roped in to help. "Debbie, this is very important," said Dr. Dart. "Natalie says you both felt ill before Johnny Burnham was sick. Is that right?" "Well, yes, miss. Well, to be honest, I don't know. I can't remember him being ill. Just Natalie told me she felt rubbish too, and then we must have passed out." Debbie took a glass of water and sipped carefully. Itch was about to add to the story when Dr. Dart looked at him and exclaimed, "Good heavens, Itchingham, you've lost your eyebrows!" She glanced over at the greenhouse. "What happened in there?" She put one hand under his chin and lifted his head, exactly as his mother had done last night. Maybe all women did it. "My goodness, they've gone completely. Has anyone else lost their eyebrows?" Miss, no. It happened last night. I had, an accident at home and they, well, I'll grow back, Mum says." Under other circumstances, Itch felt sure he would have been questioned further, but it looked as though Dr. Dart had made her mind up about something. She walked over to Miss Glenacre. "Grace, come and see me when you can face it. Do you have the keys for the greenhouse?" The biology teacher reached into her pocket and produced a fob with 2 keys on it and handed them to the head. Dr. Dart walked over to the greenhouse and looked inside without entering. She called Jim Littlewood and 2 other members of staff, and between them, with handkerchiefs over their mouths, they reached in and pulled out the bags. They were piled up in a sorry, and in a few instances soggy, heap. She then shut the door and locked it with both keys. Nathaniel Flaherty came bustling over about to question the locking of the greenhouse, but Dart cut him off. "It's locked and out of bounds to everyone, staff included, until we know what's happened. The ambulances will be here shortly. Come and see me when all the students have been attended to." With that, she returned to the pupils and escorted 2 of them back towards the main school. That afternoon, ambulances ferried the worst affected pupils to the local hospital. About half of Miss Glenacre's greenhouse class ended up filling the rows of the small outpatients reception. Itch was sitting with Jack and Johnny Burnham, who was still looking the greenest of them all. No one had actually been sick since arriving, but there were a few groaning noises coming from the direction of Bruno Paul on the other side of the room. He was sitting with Matt Colston and next to Miss Glenacre, who was still supposedly in charge, but had had her eyes shut for 10 minutes now. "I feel okay," said Jack. "I'm not sure why I'm here." "Well, they did seem keen to bring us in," said Itch. "They've seen Johnny, Natalie, and Debbie for tests. They'll get to us by midnight, I suppose." Jack leaned in close. "Any theories?" "I should have, but no, not really. Some gas going off at one of the plants, maybe. There are some pretty weird ones in there." He paused. They've been in the greenhouse for ages. That doesn't make sense. He was annoyed with himself. A dodgy batch of water, perhaps, said Jack. Everyone was drinking the same stuff. It shrugged. They looked up at the sound of running footsteps. Parents were hurrying along the corridor towards the outpatients. The swing doors burst open as Craig Murray's mother and Natalie Hussein's parents burst in. As they looked around the room, Bruno Paul stood up, turned around to face the wall, and vomited over the "Don't Swear at the Staff" poster. As it followed in quick succession by Ian Steele being sickened to his cuffed hands and Matt Colston being sick on Miss Glenacre, he then woke up. 6 pupils dashed towards the toilets and 3 made for the car park. "Here we go again," said Jack, and she got up. "Are you—" "No, I'm just going to help." She jogged off in the direction of the toilets, and then she looked at Johnny Burnham, who remarkably was eating a packet of prawn cocktail crisps. Nurses and doctors arrived from everywhere, and 2 porters appeared with mops and buckets. The flustered receptionist emerged from behind her desk and tried to raise her voice above the moaning, spilling, and slopping. No one could hear what she said, so she gave up and sat down again. It was after 5 o'clock when Dr. Dart emerged from one of the corridors, walking briskly with a senior-looking doctor at her side. She was pale, but her face was set, and she looked determined. She stood at the front of the outpatients area as though it was one of her classrooms. "I am being advised to close the school." There were gasps and an outburst of chatter, but she put up her hand for silence. "Early toxicology tests from the staff here suggest," she paused, "that the illness was in some cases caused by, incredible as this seems, a poison gas of some kind. Until they know where it came from, the school is closed for the rest of this week." Itch felt his mouth go dry, his stomach tighten and his bowels lurch. He had completely forgotten the packages at the bottom of his bag. "Oh, help," he thought. "This is all my fault."